This week, I'm chatting to the amazing Danette Fenton-Menzies. But first, the thought-provoking question, or TPQ, I want to cover today is this. Where does fear, legacy, or inertia exist in your business? And you might be wondering, why am I thinking about this? Well, what I'm noticing at the moment is that there's quite a number of people out there who are stuck, or they are experiencing a significant amount of change fatigue. In fact, I got an email the other day from someone who said, we've just accepted that there is no BAU at the moment. And so what that means is that every day is a new challenge. And so with that feeling of stuckness or change fatigue, there's a lot of people out there looking for a fresh start, or maybe just even a definition of a new normal. But one of the things that I have observed is that quite often the leader I'm talking to knows the answer. They also know what's needed to execute the change or whatever. But the resistance is that comes from around you. So you're sitting there saying, I can see what's needed. I can see that it's possible. We've got the capability. But there's this kind of vortex. I'm sitting in a vortex of resistance. And so we know that resistance comes from attachment to lots of things. And so what I see, and I see this a lot when I'm talking to multiple executives that sit in the same executive team, is that where this attachment exists, the individuals who are attached know they're not the right things to be attached to. But what I see or what I observe, and sometimes even the language they put to that, is that being attached to this is safer than the alternative. Now, this really crystallised in a conversation I had with our CFOs recently, where we started to explore the math of courage. And when we broke down the math of courage, we saw that comfort was a big part, big input to that equation. And we noticed there were typically three sources of comfort. So attachment. It's fear. I'm scared. I'd rather just do what I'm doing because it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Legacy. This is the way we've always done it. And inertia, the steam train's moving too fast for me to stop it. So when I think about the challenges that I work on with my CEOs and CFOs, and even the challenges that I've experienced within my own business, I see that quite often that these sources of comfort are massive, but yet they're huge and intangible. So that has just led me to my thought-provoking question for you is, where does fear, I'm scared to do something else, legacy, we've always done it this way, or inertia, everything's just moving too fast for me to consider changing it. Where does fear, legacy, or inertia exist in your business? Would love to hear. And now to our chat with Danette Fenton-Menzies. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Danette Fenton-Menzies to the podcast today. There are not enough minutes or hours in the day that could allow me to articulate my love and respect for Danette. Danette is a chartered accountant and FCPA with over 30 years experience in private and public sectors, including CFO with Safe Work Australia. For over 26 years, Danette has specialised in public sector finance and leadership training. Danette regularly presents both technical and soft skills workshops and webinars. Danette is also an executive coach to CEOs with clients across the globe. Now, it would be remiss of me to finish that nice formal opening about Danette without talking about how we met and how we've established our friendship and mutual mentorship over the years. Danette and I had the pleasure and privilege of both talking at a CPA Congress many, many years ago now. And Danette, I don't know if you remember, but we messaged and said, let's catch up, but we passed each other in the corridor and we went, oh my goodness, it's you. We gave each other a hug and went, let's catch up, and we didn't. But that was the start of, I don't know how many years of friendship and mutual mentorship. You are a big reason why this podcast exists, and it's so wonderful to have you as a guest today. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Alena, and so excited. And I feel equally as blessed about the length of our friendship and how much we have grown together. So thank you so much for having me on your podcast today.
Well, you're welcome. Let's jump straight into it because I'm so excited to have this conversation. Now, one of the things we were just talking before we jumped on around how our monthly cadence is to get together around 5 a.m. Once a month, the first Wednesday of every month, 5 a.m. we jump on and we catch up and we talk about all of the things. And one of the things that I love to hear about from you is the work that you do with family businesses. And I know that this is something that you have been doing for years and years and years and really have leaned into most recently. Maybe before we dig into that bit, if you wanted to just describe a little bit about your career trajectory, because you have done all of the traditional things and then you have evolved and transformed into this beautiful niche of yours that is taking you to every single corner of the world. So if you could just start by giving us an overview of you, your trajectory and your business.
So it's really funny, Alena. When I was a little child, and I was probably only 4, someone said to me, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I said, "I want to run a business." I had no idea what a business was, but I had this picture in my head that people would put me in helicopters and fly me around the world. So that was my thought of what a business was. Now, funny nowadays, it's not necessarily helicopters, but
Yeah.
I get flown around the world, which is awesome. So in terms of career, I did economics and accounting, and I did accounting because my dad's best mate said you'll always have a job if you do accounting. And actually, that was really great advice. I wasn't the smartest person going through my accounting degree because I had a story in my head about I didn't really like numbers and didn't really get numbers. But what I discovered once I got over that silly story that I gave
Yeah.
myself is that my strength in language, so I was reading full books at 3, so my love of language actually helped me to translate really technical financial stuff into really plain English. So I get people who don't get numbers, but I also am able to have good conversations with people who do. So that sort of became a strength of mine.
Mm.
Um, First job was with Arthur Andersen. So I joined when it was the big 8, and I did audit, I did tax, I did consulting, and then moved out of Sydney. So that was in Sydney, moved to Wagga, which I worked for Coopers and Lybrand, and then moved to Canberra. I had no idea about government, literally looked through a list of government agencies and went, who'd probably want an accountant, and ended up at Department of Finance. And that was really good because government was going from cash accounting to accrual accounting, and I had only ever had accrual accounting experience because I'd had big corporate clients.
Mm.
Then I worked at Deloitte's for a little while, and then I got asked to do some training on the movement from cash to accrual accounting as government was moving in that direction. And I found my passion for being able to stand in front of groups and help groups understand concepts that previously were really foreign to them.
Mm.
And so that then became my passion of being able to work with others and help them understand stuff. And I love the light bulb moments where their brains just go ping, 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 ping. And I think because I learnt that the thing that held me back during my degree was the stories I told myself, I got really clear that I wanted to work with my brain, not against my brain. So I've spent the last years, pretty much since I started my career, learning more about how do you work with your brain to be the best version of yourself, particularly under pressure. And a couple of years ago, I wrote a book around that called The Adaptable Leader to help people practically be able to work better and actually turn up as the best version of themselves when most people aren't able to do that. Now, for many years, I've also been working in family business with my husband, so 27 years of doing that, and also working with big global family businesses. And weirdly, I don't do the finance side so much. Occasionally I do, but not so much. It's more about the family dynamic. So I'm talking and helping people understand how to work with their brain so that they can communicate better, that they can build better relationships, and also that they can navigate challenging conversations because that triggers a threat in our brain. And so most people like to avoid those conversations. And when we do them well, we actually improve our relationships, we improve our understanding of one another, and we also create stronger families, which then can go from generation to generation, which I think I love family business for that generational outlook. So
Mm.
that's a bit of a
I
So
love that. You really and you know, with what you've just described, you really it's almost like you've done all of the things, which is wonderful. And it, you know, it's no surprise how successful you are today because you've brought all of that intelligence and wisdom that, by the way, you've had since you were 4. That's just incredible. Actually 3, because that's when you said you started reading full
yeah,
books.
yeah.
So it's no wonder you are so wise and intelligent. Um, so I want to just pick up on some of the things that you just said around family businesses and the challenges and things that you work on with them because they sound quite similar to the challenges that I see in corporates. Could you just describe to me what I'm curious about is from your perspective and with your experience, how are family businesses similar and or different to private companies? Because at some point, every private company was a family business of sorts, right? So I'd love to just sort of see that from someone who has deep expertise in private companies and also deep expertise in family companies.
Yeah, and sometimes they are the same, and sometimes families get to the point where they go, "Actually, we're gonna put professionals in to run the business." So, family businesses often start with, could be mum and dad, it could be the grandparents or whatever, and often start bricks and mortar, things like that, and then as they learn and grow and the big thing I love about family businesses is usually the founders have a really strong sense of purpose. And that strong sense of purpose drives them to come up with how do we spot opportunities and how do we grow our organization. One of the things I see with the ones that last multiple generations is they understand that money is important and they understand that those relationships are equally important. So more money doesn't necessarily mean problems disappear. More money often amplifies the problems because unless we work out our stories around money and what does money mean? So money is something we can use to pay for things. And some people will have not necessarily great relationships about money. So money for them could mean power. It could mean love. So if I'm not receiving this money, I'm not loved by people. So
Mhm.
there's a whole stack of things we attach to money that the more money people have, it often amplifies those issues. And so a lot of what I do, and I do this with a dear friend of mine, Faisal Alibi, he has a company called Geneticare and he's based in Hong Kong, where we work with families to sort of really help them first understand themselves and build trust in themselves so that they become self-aware of what are the triggers that are likely to impact them in conversations when they're making decisions, etc. So again, working with the brain to be the best version. Also, understanding that what life throws at us is something that we need to trust, and that if we are calm through that, we often learn and come out stronger on the other side. And to have really great family relationships, if we don't trust ourselves, it's really hard to trust conversations and decisions with others. So it's sort of a trust what's going on in life and then learn to trust others. And so usually I spend about a year, and there's a whole stack of people that work with Faisal to do this, to help people become aware of who they are, what their purpose is, what's important. And then they're starting to learn, how do I have those difficult conversations in a way that at the end of the conversation, we are stronger as a family, as opposed to when we haven't built those skills, we often go, I'm right, you're wrong. And that then creates all sorts of turmoil. So, yeah, in terms of when it's a true family business, they might all be working in the business and that can create interesting dynamics. When it goes to the private company, sometimes families still own shares in that and they can have the majority thing, but they've often got professionals. And even there, the relationships and the communication are still super important because otherwise those professionals will go, well, maybe there's another place I'd rather work that doesn't also have that family dynamics happening. So it's a great space. I love it. And I love the generational outlook. That for me is just amazing.
And I'd love to talk about that actually, because one of the biggest challenges that I hear from the people, the CEOs and CFOs that I work with, is the tension between, how do I deliver short-term results, knowing that actually, what we put out into the market or what we say to our customers and the community is that we're here for the long term. We want sustainable, ethical growth, etc. Um, but we all know that when we're about to put up our quarterly results, suddenly it's, we go into fright mode, and sometimes make some bad choices. How do these family businesses maintain that generational outlook? And I'm interested around, what you said around, the money and relationships are equally important, because the short-term, long-term tension pretty much always centers around the money side. So I'm just curious, how does that tension, how does it exist or not? And how does that balance of money and relationships play into that perspective?
And yeah, again, it comes back to often looking at why the founders set up the business, so that, and it's often around providing that, the money for future generations, the opportunities for future generations. And so you'll often see your founders work really, really hard. And then what I see when it's done well is families will talk through and share the stories of the founders, and then, also what the next generations are seeing in terms of where they'd like to work and the opportunities they have. And the other thing I love about family businesses is when they do it well, they'll set up family offices where they'll invest on behalf of the family. So that, again, that longer term outlook. And a lot of them do a lot of philanthropy. So it's not that every family member needs to come in and do the stuff that's going to make profit. There's often a huge philanthropy arm that also is working to have impact on community. So I suppose generationally, it's not just the family, it's also the communities that they work with. The short-term thinking is, as you said, it's a fear-based one, because it's like, okay, we've got to hit our targets. And can I say, our family businesses, they have boards, they have externals that come in and talk about, hitting those targets, etc. And I think because they know that, a short-term thing, if we make it and it's not a good decision, actually is going to have impact longer term. There's that sort of thought of pausing for the short term hit the target if it's not going to be a good one from an ethical perspective. And I think that that actual dynamic would be well served in all sorts of corporations, and in fact all sorts of organisations, because one of the things in family businesses, sometimes you've got multiple generations, which mean multiple perspectives. And that's good from a decision-making perspective. When we've got different people with different perspectives, we can have robust discussions about what's the best way forward. I think one of the ways that organisations can take that lesson forward is, what is the diversity that is sitting around the table when you're making those decisions? Because we often see short-term decisions. And I've been around long enough, because I said I did work at Arthur Andersen, to have gone through, and seen play out things like Enron, World.com, HIH. I was not involved in any of those, but just watching that play out. And what we see is people very short-term focused. And the thing we know with the brain is, when we become short-term focused, we narrow most of our neural pathways and we don't make great decisions. So diversity is a way of having others sit around the table and go, hang on, is this actually a really good idea? So if we miss it slightly, yes, it might have a short-term, downwards thing on our shares. But if we do this thing that's actually not ethical, we may not be around long term to make any other decisions. So looking at the reality and going, okay, how do we show that we are ethical, that we have that longer term, and in some instances, making the really difficult decisions to go, maybe we're not going to quite hit our targets, and we're doing that because we can see the long-term gain of doing that, versus a very short-term gain, which is then going to drive that behaviour again and again, because it's really hard to catch up if you're taking shortcuts. That long-term view, yes, it's more difficult. Yes, you have to talk to the market, etc. And if you want to be around for a long time, that for me is learning to have those difficult conversations not just one-on-one, but with the market to show who you are. And, there are some corporates that we see in the world like Patagonia, et cetera, who go, "This is who we are,
Yeah.
and we're not gonna do these other things, and look at them, their performance is amazing." So, short term might feel good sometimes, but if you're gonna then constantly have to play catch up and it's not quite above board, I would say take a deep breath, get some different people around you, and think about, how do we do this better? Not for the short term, but also to last for the long term.
And you make a good point that these family businesses, they've got external people that they are accountable to. They don't get to operate in this beautiful, we're a family business silo. These are big businesses, billion-dollar businesses that have external stakeholders. I'm curious, just to sort of extend that thought just a little bit, what do those conversations sound like? So, as you say, you've got the benefit of the multi-generations, you've got the benefit of people that are truly anchored into, why did our founders create this entity? So there's that, it's got a deep sense of purpose that really, everyone is bought into. But there's, when it comes to, we're not going to hit the short term, what does I'm curious about what that challenge actually sounds like.
So in a lot of instances, I actually think it's easier sometimes in a family to have this conversation because they've been brought up with that generational outlook. Like, there might be struggles in the current generation and they might be working on their relationships
Mm.
to move forward. And when those relationships aren't necessarily working so well, you can lift the conversation up by going, okay, what needs to happen so that the next generation isn't experiencing it
Mm.
at this level? So that, for any leader, when we start to think longer term, it's about lifting our level of skills to be able to go, all right, what do we need to do differently? How do we set the next, and it doesn't have to be the next generation, it could be the professionals up to be able to do this well, to spot the opportunities. And when we work with our brain, we're way more likely to spot opportunities rather than having a lot of fear-based conversations where this is happening now. I think the longer family businesses have been in business, they have that beautiful, they can look back and see that, yes, every generation had ups and downs and ups and
Mm.
downs. And that's a cycle of business. So then being able to go, okay, well, how do we set this up for the next generation or for the professionals to be able to navigate those ups and downs? And, to be able to be around, and there's family businesses that have been around for enormous generations, like, there's 18 generations, 40 generations. That's enormous length of time in a business. Making sure that those conversations about the lessons learned are passed on, setting up, where possible, conversations with the founders and Gen 2 and Gen 3 and Gen 4 where possible, so that that legacy gets passed. I recently read a book by Lego, and it talked about the Lego family passage and how they'd sort of gone from the person who started it, who was about creating toys with wood, through to what Lego is today. And, there's professionalization in that family. And what I liked about that particular book was it was really about the dynamics and how in families that can be really difficult, because you might not agree with your sibling, but if you can lift it up to, well, what does that mean for the next generation? It sort
Mm.
of takes some of that ego out of the conversation and actually keeps that long-term focus too. Does that help?
It does. And this is you mentioned your book earlier,
Yes.
which I love, The Adaptable Leader. What you have done in this book is put so many deep, I don't know how you've synthesized so many deep and robust concepts in such an easy to read and understand and apply way. So first of all, well done. But actually the thought that was running through my head, you've got this beautiful model, the accept model, which is really that first key to being an adaptable leader. And the A in accept means authentic. Now, one of the things that I always hear from every single client that I work with is, I just want to be my authentic self. And it all sounds lovely and it's a little bit of a kumbaya moment. Actually, in fact, most of them vomit when they say it because they kind of go, oh, it just feels a bit icky, right? But but then that's all well and good, right? They're professionals and they know that leadership today, you do need to be your full self, authentic self, genuine self, whatever that means. That's fine. I can go in and I can elect to go into a company that shares values and I can be authentic. Now, in a family business, just because you're part of a family does not mean you naturally share the same values, perspectives, and views as your siblings or parents or children. So I'm just really curious when you talk about, the benefits of the diversity, the benefits of being able to have these conversations around a family. But at the same time, Danette, what do you do when you suddenly, how do you be truly authentic in a family business when by construct you're needing to fit into something?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alena. So part of being authentic is learning what are your strengths? What are the areas you're not so good at? So when you're in a family business, it's okay to not have the same values. It's important to have certain values together. If the business is built on, say, sustainability and you totally don't agree with that, that means decisions will be interesting, but it could still be managed in that instance. But I think what happens in any business, and this is private sector, government, etc., is when we don't know who we truly are, we might flip and flop on decisions because we're not driven by our values, we're not driven by our purpose because we're not really aware of them.
Mm.
The other thing is our brains all filter differently. So every single person that comes into an organisation, whether they're family or not, brings a different perspective. And when I know that that's the value I bring to an organisation, when I talked earlier about making strong, not wrong, if I can bring in multiple perspectives that are quite diverse and we're dealing with a challenge that's difficult, we're going to get a better solution with that diversity. Now, it's going to take probably a little bit longer because we're going to have difficult, uncomfortable conversations. And I was on a podcast just before this and talking to a dear friend of mine, Anne Braithwaite, and she was talking about what we know is when everyone looks and sounds and feels the same, you'll get a quicker decision, but there'll be blind spots. And she actually used the idea of a frame and then everyone looks the same. So everyone's in the same little circle. Well, there's lots of bits within that frame then that group's not seeing. But if you've got different dots because everyone's different, you're going to see more of those blind spots and therefore make better decisions. So I think, and I think I just took myself off on a rabbit hole track.
Love the rabbit holes.
the when we all learn to be authentic, we also are able to go, hey, I'm not quite understanding that perspective. Can you tell me more? And I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I actually genuinely want to learn so that I can get rid of some of my blind spots. Whereas if none of us are authentic, we're going to have good conversations, but they're not going to be deep. And we're going to have blind spots if we're all trying to be exactly the same. And that longer term's probably not great for the organisation because the decisions we're going to make are not going to pick up. As we know, the world's changing so fast, they're not going to pick that up because we'll just go, well, my view of the world is it looks like this. And in fact, it looks like this. So, yeah.
So you've just what you just did, I'm not sure if this is from decades of training, you have just beautifully segued into the C of accept, which is curious or curiosity.
Yes.
You have mentioned reference to time a couple of times in that last statement.
Yes.
And you've talked about this idea of things might take a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And the pace of change is just so ridiculously fast. If we pause, we might miss it.
Or we mightn't.
Okay, so tell me about that because I think, when it comes to this short-term decision making, when it comes to this, it's much easier to hang out with people that all think and breathe and feel the same way as me. It is not it's typically, yes, it's coming from a place of safety, but I think most leaders out there today want to be diverse. They want to be curious. They want to get the best result. And they know that taking the time, diverse thinking, all the rest of it is the right way. But there's
Yes.
this pressure of time. And I think this rapid pace of change is, that
Yeah.
is, I mean, it's real, right?
Yes.
Um, I think that's making that really challenging. So how do you balance that? And I'd love for you to challenge that
Yep.
thought.
Yep. So what I'm seeing in the leaders that are navigating this best is that they realize that they can't do everything. Their organizations can't do everything. So rather than trying to do lots of things and be busy, and often busy on stuff that doesn't necessarily value add, they sort of step back and go, well, where are our strengths? Where are we likely to deliver extra value to the marketplace? And let's concentrate on those rather than trying to do everything that we're trying to do. And the beautiful thing is, none of us get our best ideas when we're under pressure. So as leaders, actually what we want them to do is to have space so that they can let their brains do what they do best and spot new opportunities. Now, you're not going to do that under pressure. You will, however, when you've got space. So it's looking at, well, of all the things we do, and I love the book 80/20 by Richard Koch, where he talks about, basically 80% of your revenue often will come from 20% of your clients. And when we service those clients well, um, that's often much better investment of time. And when you sort of start to look at some of the ones that you don't spend a lot of time with, but they use a lot of your time and you don't get a lot of revenue from, you
Mm.
can start to look at smarter ways of interacting in an environment where everyone's doing the busy bit. Don't do what everyone does, because often that is not brain friendly and it's not going to have the impact that you want. So I love that. What's his name that runs Microsoft? It'll come to all of us.
Yeah, it
Uh,
will.
he takes time off each year to read and to think, and like he deliberately takes, I think it's 2 weeks, maybe every 6 months. I could have got that wrong. But in
Mm.
doing that, he's stepping away from the world and then coming back with better ideas. And there are many geniuses that we see in the world that they literally will take 6 months off every year and go
Mm.
dark. And the dark is they're actually stepping away from all of the busyness and lots of noise to look for what are the signals to move us forward that are actually going to have those big impacts. And so for me, I'm ever grateful because Robin Sharma, who wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, he was our coach, so Graham and my coach for many years. And he always used to say, don't do what most of the world is doing because it's in that crazy busy cycle. Actually, work hard for a couple of hours a day and then go and play, because it's in the play that your brain actually comes up with
Mm.
the best insights. So the third bit, so the curiosity is, play, questions and stuff like that. The third bit of the accepts model, the C, is collaborate. And my thing that I see is we can't do this by ourselves. So what we need to do is make collaboration part of who our organization is by bringing in that diversity, bringing in those different strengths, and working together through great conversations, great questions, and space to create that way forward, which is different from let's do 50 million things. Let's not do 50 million things. Let's do a couple of things, but do them awesome rather than wasting a lot of resources doing too much.
So I'm going to put myself into the mind of a listener
Yes.
or a viewer of this conversation, and I'm going to put myself in the mind of someone who is a professional hire into a family business. And I see this and I hear everything that you're saying, Danette. I'm lapping it up, going, yes, yes, yes. I see the opportunity here. And, because of where the business is at, they're not particularly, they created this business or founded this business because they had subject matter expertise in a particular domain.
Yes.
And it may not have been in finances or leadership, et cetera, right? And I'm listening to this conversation going, gosh, there's so much opportunity here. And but but my founders or the family members in the business are in the spiral, right?
Yes.
They're doing what everybody is doing.
Yes.
W how do I take from the conversation that we've had so far, Danette, what would you suggest that if I'm the professional hire into this family business, how do I take this and do something with it?
I love it. So if this is happening, so you're listening to this before you get hired into the family business, I would remind all of us that when we go for an interview, it's not just the business interviewing you, it's also you interviewing the business. So I would be asking questions. If I know that my nature is that I'm going to want to make suggestions to improve, etc., I would be asking in the interview, how did they go about, bringing new thoughts, new ways of moving forward? How do they go, and ask them to give examples of where they've done that to check that they're not just saying, oh, yeah, we do that, but then they don't do it.
Mm.
So I do my own intel before actually getting into the family business. Couple of things we know about the brain is that if you want to influence people, if you talk first, most people that are on the receiving end will tend to not listen as much because they're trying to formulate what they want to share with you. So a simple tip is to actually ask them to explain, why they're doing it this way at the moment, and just sit with them sharing that to understand their perspective. Now, what you'll see is if they're really passionate about what they're doing, they'll go blah, 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 blah. And it's in that they are signaling they feel heard by you. And in that moment, they will then be more open to your perspective. So that doesn't take 5 minutes. It usually takes about 20 to 30 minutes if they're really passionate and a bit frustrated with what's going on. So you have to be prepared to just be present and listen to what they're saying. And then the thing that often sparks people's brains to open wide up is to ask better questions. And so, if that person's telling you about, we do this, it's really busy, but I'm frustrated about this, dig into the frustration. So if you could, what would you do different about this frustration? The frustration might be, we're so busy, we don't get to hang out as a family very much. Or when we do hang out as a family, we talk only business. And the poor professionals are like, oh my goodness, there's so much going on. So as a professional, those questions actually help us, one, to work with the family members, but two, also to open up other people's perspectives. So what's the opportunity here, which I got that off Robin Sharma? That's a great question. So when things aren't working well, a lot of people go, oh, this is a disaster, particularly when there's difficult conversations to be had. And I'm like, what's the opportunity here? You get to level up to the next level if you can have those conversations. And so I would encourage all professionals, but also all family members, to capture great questions. So if you find yourself going, man, that's a great question, and I love the questions you've been asking, Alena, write those down, capture them, because when we start questions, if they're good ones, will open our brain up and allow us to see possibilities that others don't. And that's part of that curiosity as well.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And it's really interesting, the one you've already picked up a couple of elements of, when I think about the real math of business, the people side, the 50% of people side, really, it's about, are you hiring the right people, and are they being led most effectively? And so I love your point around, when you are potentially being hired into a family business, making sure that you are asking the right questions to make sure that it's right for you. I am curious around, right people hired in the structure of a family business. Your pool is the family. And I guess the question that the context, that I'm referring to is maybe a family business who is not ready to hire externally. They're still operating in the family business. What do you see family businesses do in terms of the making sure they've hired correctly when their pool is a family business? How do they deal with that? And I guess the corporate business analogy is, and you will have seen this with the work that you've done with corporates as well, is that conundrum where leaders are saying, well, I've got a bum on a seat. Maybe I can get them there. Maybe I can't. And so there's a bit of paralysis there as well. So kind of, yeah, what do you do when the pool is limited to family members?
Great question. When you're thinking in any organisation, this is family business, private sector, public sector, etc. It's working out, first of all, knowing the purpose, getting people in who, are on board with the purpose, on board with the values, but also as a family looking at, well, where are our strengths and where are our gaps? So as a family, smart families will hire people who fill those gaps really strongly, and they're not afraid to lean on the expertise of the person who's come from outside the family. Where it doesn't work is where family are still in that fear-based ego reaction, so they don't want to hire someone smarter than them. Like, the way everyone gets smarter is you increase the level of smartness in the room, and the smartness is not just IQ, it's also EQ. It's also AQ, which is adaptability quotient. But so, if the family's really good at doing XYZ and producing XYZ, they may need help from the people side. So they might need a really smart, chief of HR or something like that. So it's then also being able to sit in a room where the perspective might be really different from the professional, and being open enough that if this person's got really great expertise, etc., they're actually trying to help us get better. And what they're suggesting might be way outside my comfort zone. How do we build that so that we can move forward together, rather than what I often hear, and you would have heard this many times, is that people just go, no, but. And the moment someone puts a great idea on the table and the other person goes, no, but, you sort of stop that ability to be dynamic and adaptable, because you're basically going, we're going to do it this way, and we're not even going to consider something that's outside that. So I see it done well when the family recognises their gaps and brings in people that are really good at those gaps. And I see it not done well where family just are not ready to let go of that control to the professionals who are actually, in this instance, experts in what they do. So again, it comes back to that, how well do I know myself, and how well am I able to work and collaborate with others versus still need that control, which is very fear-based often.
I love that, and I know you talk a bit about. I want to deep dive into the brain because you've mentioned it a few times. You talk about it in your book, but I want to pick up if we can kind of start the deep dive into the brain through the lens of this ego. Yeah, and that's not ego. I'm a rock star. I'm untouchable. It is just everybody's. Everybody has an ego.
Yes.
And that sense of self. Tell me about what goes on with someone who is in that ego mindset, and tell me about what are the steps the brain takes when they can start to let go and can start to hand over some of that trust.
I love that. So as you said, everyone has the ego. And the way I define it is really that our brain is actually programmed to look more for threats than it is for positive things. So we all have a bit of that. And when ego shows up in the room, what I say to people the first time I'm starting to coach them is I'll say, if I hear these different things, I'm going to say, oh, I've just noticed that the ego's in the room. And, I've pre-framed this. So I'm not just going, the ego's out. I'm just like, oh, I'm curious. The ego, I can hear the ego coming in. So it's when we're defending ourselves, when we're judging others, when we're going, the problem's this little, when it's actually this big. And so our brain does all of these things to try and make us right and feel safe, when in fact, the moment I hear ego, so someone justifying why they did and they were right and the other person was wrong, is I just recognize that the brain has gone to that threat response. And so my role as a coach is to go, oh, here it is. So, because you can't change what you're not aware of. So the first thing is to go, oh, I can see that you've gone from a calm person to you're a little bit frantic, or you're being more negative than you normally are. So for all of us, it's looking at when we are best, the ego is very quiet. When we are not at best, we'll tend to be, we'll perhaps bitch behind people's backs. We'll, think very short term and it's all about fear. And that's a natural part of what our brain does. Like, it has to deal with threats. So once you're aware of it, the best way to get the blood flow to the thinking part so you can be your best version is to slow the whole process down. So our brain loves certainty and it's a predictive machine. So with certainty, we want to make fast decisions. What I want everyone to understand is that most fast decisions under pressure are us running biases. And the moment we run a bias, it's a shortcut for our brain making decisions. And our biases are very flawed shortcuts. So if we take a deep breath or two, then what happens is our brain doesn't need to rush. It'll sit a little bit in that discomfort to be able to go, okay, well, I don't have all the answers now. Who could I talk to? What other information should I gather? So it allows us to slow down, particularly on the complex decisions and stuff like that. There are some things that we don't need to think about. We can just do checklists and stuff like that. But for the more complex decisions, the more calm a leader is, the more calm a room of leaders are in a family or a non-family, we're going to make better decisions. The more diverse, the more we're going to spot the blind spots that might stop us making a great decision. So know that a couple of deep breaths, and it can be box breathing. So 4 breaths through your nose, hold for 4, 4 breaths out through your nose, hold for 4. Or it can be one I learnt on the Diary of a CEO, which is you do 2 short breaths in and then a slow breath out. And that was from Jefferson Fisher, one of the people he interviewed. And they literally go, the big thing is the slow exhale tells our brain it's okay to send the blood flow to the thinking part rather than the survival, which is where the fear tends to come out. So breath is super important, staying hydrated, surrounding yourself with people who are asking great questions. All of those help to control the ego. And once the ego's in the room, if it's you go, oh, crap, I just noticed it's there. I'm really sorry, everyone. I'm just going to take a couple of deep breaths and move forward. By doing that as a leader, you also give everyone else permission to notice when they get triggered. And later on, they can explore what that trigger's about. And there's some great tools that can help people do that too.
Wow. Just to your very last point, I would be so inspired to be in a room where someone were to say, oh my goodness, my ego's just entered into this conversation. Let me just pause
Yeah.
and reset. I just, the transformation in culture from that one statement would be phenomenal.
Yep. Yeah.
Phenomenal.
And can you imagine, when we see those short-term not great decisions, there's going to be lots of ego in the room because everyone's like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? To have a leader go, actually, this is not the best way forward. Let's all take a deep breath. Let's pause, maybe take a 10-minute break and then let's come back. 10 minutes generally is not going to make that big a difference in the decision. But if we can slow our brains down and be purposeful, wow, what a huge difference, not just short term, but long term as well. And you're teaching everyone in the room, particularly if you're, say, the CEO or the chairman of the board, you are teaching the room what's the best way forward. So in those really senior positions, super important.
Yeah. Now we're coming up to time, Danette, and I still have 1,000,001 questions that I would love to cover with you. So we might need to get you back. But I guess my final question before we close out the conversation is, where does courage come into this? And maybe the relevant question, given the conversation we've had, is how do we use our brain to incite that courage that we might need to say such things, or even to start this conversation with our board of the chair of the board or whoever?
Yeah. So, we can't change anyone else's behavior, but we can bring our authentic self. And I think courage is difficult, and as a leader, it takes us to that next level. So if you're the only person in the room that's going, we need to talk about this elephant, that can be difficult, and sometimes the room will shut the conversation. A really helpful tip that every leader should learn is if someone in the group throws the elephant on the table and points at it, my role, if I haven't pointed it out, is to back that person up so the room will stick with the conversation. So I would go, Alena's point, actually, I want to talk about that too. When one person raises the elephant, the room will often get uncomfortable and shut it down. It's
Mhm.
really hard to shut down when two people in the room go, actually, I want to talk about that too. So
Mm.
we can actually support one another to be courageous and know that courage is a muscle. So the more we build it, the more people know that we're authentic and that in difficult conversations, we will have their back because we're willing to raise those difficult things that most people are scared about. And again, that's just the brain going, I need to protect you.
Yeah.
Work together and, if support someone if they raise it, but start small. So say no when you want to say no instead of saying yes to something. And it could be someone asked, do you want a sugar? And you're normally like, no, thank you. And then just start to build on that muscle so that you get used to it's okay. In fact, being uncomfortable just means you're growing as a leader, as a family member, as a business owner.
And I guess, and I won't, I promise we're not going to go down here because we are coming to time. The E is experiment. And, I
Yes.
think about this, you could do a little courage experiment on
Yes.
yourself, couldn't you, to
Yes.
build that muscle?
Yes.
But I think you make a good point. And, when you said that you can't change someone else,
Yeah.
of course you can't. But I guess this comes back to one of your very early points, which is you need to know yourself and you need to know your strengths to then be able to lean into those strengths and access the courage that way.
Yes.
Danette, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I can't believe the depth and your generosity in all of the different tips and practical tips and tools and the books that you've shared. You and I love recommending books to each
Yes.
other. You've recommended the Lego book, the 80/20 book. Thank you so much. We've referred a little bit to your book.
Yes.
How is the best way for people to get the book? How is the best way for people to come in and contact you if they've loved what they've heard?
So I have a website called danettefm.com. I'm also, you can find me on Magical Learning because that's my company as well. So it's magicallearning.com. And I'm most active on LinkedIn. There is only one Danette Fenton-Menzies in the world, so it's pretty easy to find me there as well.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time
Alena.
today and your generosity of sharing so much that we can learn from you, given your breadth of experience in pretty much all walks of life. I thank you for, as I said, your guidance and mentorship. I learned so much from you, and I hope that we've been able to share that to the listeners today.
And big hugs.
Big hugs. Thanks, Danette.
Thank you.
And what a great chat with Danette. Isn't she wonderful? And that leads us right into our listener question. And remember, if you want to submit a listener question, you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and we'll hopefully bring that into a future episode. So today's listener question is from Paige. Paige, great to see you. Great to hear from you. Paige says, "Hello, Alena. Your podcast covers a lot of really interesting topics, and I love that. What is a common problem you find in businesses that are more easy to understand and solve when you understand the people side of business?" Thank you, Paige. Paige, great question, and I'm really pleased that you brought that up. If we just kind of zoom it out a little bit, remember the real math of business is 50% people and 50% math. We want to create businesses that are universally investable. Everybody wants to invest in them. And those are businesses where people serve people and the math just works. And the way I think about the real math of business, it's a little bit like a pendulum. We kind of swing one way to another depending on where our focus is. Being able to understand how those two things interact really become a superpower. And so your question page around, what are the most common problems that are more easy to understand and solve when you understand the people side of business really gets to the heart of that understanding of both elements. I want to give you two answers, Paige, and I want to do that because one is a little more micro and one is at a little more macro level. So at a micro level, I would say, change. Any change project. So every company I know is going through some version of change, whether that's a big change and transformation project, or maybe it's just a change in a process, a policy, or a procedure, right? And what the business problem, what that sounds like is we need to do the change. Everyone needs to know. Everyone knows they need to do the change. I've told them that it's going to be much better once we've changed. Why won't they get on board? Is that whole problem of why won't they get on the bus? Well, I think when you really understand that it's actually not about the end result and it's not about the rational understanding of, we know we need to change, we know it's going to be better on the other side, that actually is not the people side. We need to be able to go back and say, who are these individuals that we are dealing with? Who are these individuals that are going through said change, and what is going on for them at an individual level? We must remember that individuals, you can only influence one person at a time. So when we think about any sort of change project, we quite often think about, change management for a group. That's just not going to work. You need to remember the people side of the business is that every single human is one person. Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this with in a previous conversation with Yvonne Hiltz. But we must remember that we are dealing with each individual human who has their own perspective, their own context, both at work and outside of work, and all of those things really feed into their appetite for said change. So that'd be the first sort of micro level, is thinking, okay, what change are you putting people through or that people are being exposed to? And do you understand the individuals that are going through said change? Once you have understood that, it will blow right open and it will suddenly become really clear. You may get the what you might consider at face value to be undesirable outcome of they are never going to buy into this change project. And that's okay. Setting someone free because they don't like or they're not bought into what the future holds, that is 100% fine. But again, once you've got that understanding of, what drives them, what's going on for them, that is going to blow it wide open for you. So that's the response or the example of a business problem at a micro level. I think at a macro level, where I really see this come up from a business problem perspective is when you can't get the same results out of the people that you used to. So, if you think about companies go through their different stages of success, and quite often what I see is that, companies climb the first mountain, they get to a certain level of success, and then they kind of see that second mountain and they go, oh, that's the one I want to go to. Well, now, the second mountain usually comes with some sort of elevation of skill required, elevation of maturity required at an individual level, but also at a cultural level. And so what that sounds like is, I don't know what's going on with my executive team. They've changed. I don't know if I can, I don't know if they're the right people anymore. And this really talks to the inputs to the people side of the equation. We know that it's about the right people hired and people being led effectively. So the questions you want to be asking when you are faced with the conundrum of, gosh, I just don't seem to be getting the same positive results out of my team or of my people. The two questions you want to be asking yourself is, do you still have the right people that you need for at this stage of the journey? And do you still have the right leadership to lead your company and people for this stage of the journey? It's kind of that, kind of is summed up really nicely by that statement, what got you here won't get you there. And again, that is 100% okay. Yeah. So, Paige, I hope that gives you a good understanding at a macro level and at a micro level, some of the business problems that can be understood and solved for more effectively once you understand that people side of the equation. Thank you again for submitting that question. So finally, thank you for listening to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. If you liked that episode, please remember to subscribe for more content and stay on top of the real math of business. I've been Alena Bennett. Thank you so much for listening.